my name is Shelley Lee, and I am with Green Beverly, and I think at least one of you didn't know who Green Beverly is, so I'd love to tell you. We're a nonprofit in Beverly that is working to help residents and businesses live more sustainable lives. We have a lot of initiatives going on, and so I'm just going to tell you a few of them because we'd love to talk to you if you're interested in these things. We're definitely trying to encourage residents to buy EVs, and to that end, we have a $500 car charger rebate. So if you're buying a car right now and you're going to put in your level 2 car charger, we can give you a $500 rebate. We're working on energy efficiency upgrades with landlords. So if you're a landlord in Beverly, we'd love to talk to you. And lastly, we have a big event at the Cabot on February 26th. It's part of their community conversation series, and it's all about food and our local food system. So go to the Cabot and you can register for that event, which is February 26th. What day is it?
February 26th.
Good, thank you. All right.
What day of the week is it?
That is a great question. I believe it's a Wednesday. It's a Wednesday, yeah. Thank you. So we have a grant from the Essex County Community Foundation. So those are all the other things we're doing, and then we're doing invasives as well. So we have a grant from the Essex County Community Foundation, which is ECCF, to remove invasives in Beverly's public spaces, so like J.C. Phillips and other wooded areas. And we have a grant from them that is covering this event as well. So a huge thanks to ECCF, and they're hopefully going to watch the video, so let's give them a big round of applause to ECCF. Thank you, ECCF. So our presenter today is Cheryl Rafuse, and she is the owner of Plant Magic, which is a gardening installation company. Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure, okay. And she'll be telling you how to identify invasives and how to remove them in your own yard, which is of course why you're here. And she is leading the effort to pull invasives in our public spaces as well. So if you're interested in working with us, we have people doing it on Saturday and Sundays from now into March. So talk to one of us and we'll get you hooked up. So thank you very much, Cheryl, and with that, take it away.
Hello. Hi everybody, I'm Cheryl Rafuse. I run Plant Magic Gardens, where we design, install, and maintain native plant gardens. And I'm dressed like it's summer because I run really, really hot and I wore like the thickest sweater, thinking, you know, I'm outside a lot and I think my brain was like, it's really cold. So I should have worn short sleeves, but here we are. So you'll notice there's a bunch of branches in a couple different places in here. Back there in the white vase, there's actually a bunch of invasive plants that we're going to be talking about. So if you want a closer look at the end, you can look at those. And then I'll probably pass around a couple of little pieces too, just so people can get a really good idea of what we're looking for, because going from pictures can be really difficult. So the things we're going to cover today are identifying the kinds of native plants that are in the Beverly and the North Shore area, and my preferred methods of getting rid of them, plus some of the ways that conservationists have talked about getting rid of really bad plants like Japanese knotweed. Hello, hello. Oh, that's nice. All right, where was I?
Above board.
Oh yeah, herbicides. So just as like a overall disclaimer about herbicides, because we are going to talk about herbicides in this talk. As a homeowner, technically, you can go to Home Depot or online or wherever and get whatever herbicide and put it wherever you want. Does that mean you should use it willy-nilly? I don't think so. I think you should use it very judiciously. We're going to talk about different ways of doing that. But if you are a company, and you want to use herbicide, you have to have an herbicide applicator's license. And we've decided that we don't actually want to use herbicides, so we actually subcontract to someone who does and who knows the herbicides really, really well and specializes in that. So just as something to keep in mind, if you do have someone else on your property applying a herbicide, make sure that they have an herbicide applicator's license, because that means that they've had to actually do the research and take the tests to know what the heck they're doing. All right, disclaimer's over. So invasive plants can be kind of a little bit of a touchy subject for some people. I don't know if you've been on Facebook ever, but I've witnessed several arguments about what's invasive versus what's not invasive, what's aggressive, what's native. And so I like to start this off by just defining some terms. Native plants are plants that have evolved with the local ecosystem over hundreds of years and fulfill important environmental roles. This is the definition that I tend to go with. There's a couple, depending on who you're talking to, but ultimately it's things that have evolved with the local ecosystem. Sometimes people will talk about how, maybe it was a plant that was here before the Europeans settled here, which means that it wasn't brought over from another country. Things like Queen Anne's lace, people are like, well, it's like naturalized. It's not from here. Technically, it's from Europe, but it's not invasive. It doesn't push other things out, so people maybe don't worry about it as much. From the USDA Forest Service, indigenous, terrestrial, and aquatic species that have evolved and occur naturally in a particular region, ecosystem, and habitat. So that's pretty close to the first one. That's kind of where we're at. It's something that's evolved here. And then a near native is a term that loosely defines plants that are close enough, which is used more by people like me who are like planting native gardens. It's used by a lot of homeowners who are like, well, technically this is native like just over the border in New York, but borders are made up. So the fact that we're saying like, no, it's native to New York, but not Massachusetts, it's like, have we really combed every single inch of the border of Massachusetts? I think, we can blur the lines a little bit. A non-native plant is a plant that has not evolved with the local flora and fauna and has been introduced somehow. So is anyone here a boater? Like kayaking or, lake stuff or ocean stuff. So if you move your boat from one body of water to another body of water, you are required to clean the bottom of your boat. And that's one that I think a lot of people actually know about because duckweed and other invasive plants even the tiniest piece of it on a boat can take over a small lake or pond. So that's something that I think is like a touchstone for people to understand what is happening with other invasive plants in our ecosystem. So invasive plants, non-native or alien to the ecosystem under consideration and whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm to, human health. This is the U.S. Department of Agriculture. To put it like a lot more simply, it's a plant that is harmful to the ecosystem, period. It either pushes out native plants or it's allelopathic, which means that there's a chemical in its root system that makes the soil almost toxic to other plants, which obviously the U.S. Agriculture Department of Agriculture is not interested in allelopathic plants in their areas because that would be pretty hard to grow food in. Aggressive plants are actually just any plant that spreads quickly. So, a native plant can be considered aggressive, but it can't be considered invasive because it actually grew up here. It lived here before you started to plant your garden. Do we have any questions about that part? Cool. So another term that you might hear is naturalized plants. Naturalized plants are non-native species that are growing on its own in nature without causing harm to the ecosystem. So one that people tend to talk about is forsythia. It's not native. It's not from here. You think it's from here because it's everywhere and it pops up in weird places that you're like, it couldn't have been planted there. It's actually been planted by the people who do the highways and stuff like that. They actually are required to plant certain shrubs and trees, and it's been used frequently in that kind of setting. So when you're driving along a highway and you see it, you think that's natural, but it's not. It's been planted, and then it kind of takes over an area. It's good for erosion, which is why people will plant it because the root systems are so crazy. But I try not to plant it. I think we've planted maybe 2 in the entire 5 years I've been running my business because, a client was like, please, but it's not one that I like to spread. So why should we get rid of these? A lot of times they might be serving a purpose. And I stole this honey from this honey. And she brought it, and it's from Hudson Hives. And it's a Japanese knotweed honey. Now, if something is, performing a service, why are we getting rid of it? A lot of people will say that about Japanese knotweed because it's edible. There's actually like a big movement to eat invasive plants, which I don't think it's bad to eat invasive plants. But the problem that I have with this line of thinking is that we start to think like, well, if we eat it, then it's good. And that is not the case. There are plenty of plants that we can eat without encouraging legitimately harmful plants in our ecosystem. I was in a talk that was actually put on by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, that was billed as a pollinator class. And the guy who ran it was actually a beekeeper, and he talked about honeybees the whole time and about how important they are. And I was pissed because that is not why I took the class. Not that honeybees are the worst and terrible and awful or anything like that, but they are not the bees that we are saving. Like, we are saving native bees who need native plants. The thing about the invasive plants is that they don't necessarily have the right mix of nutrients and in their nectar that some of the invasive plants have. So yes, bees might be all over the Japanese knotweed. That doesn't mean we should keep it. Does that make sense? Does anyone have questions about that? I know some of this gets a little wavy. This is a weird argument that I've had online where someone was like, and I always just mention it now because I don't know when it's gonna pop up, and I'd like to cut it off at the knees before it starts because someone was like, comparing getting rid of invasive plants to immigration policy. And I was like, these are very different things, my friend. People who are colonists who brought these plants over need to actually take responsibility for the plants that they have brought and control the invasive species so that we can allow the indigenous species to thrive. And when I put it like that, they're like, oh, okay, all right, never mind. But I just throw it out there because it was a real weird, it's happened more than once, which is weird, but just strange things. We already kind of talked about this. Some people really love autumn olive. It is a tasty plant, but take your last harvest of it and dig that thing out and put it in the wood chipper and put, a blueberry bush in its place or something that will actually, help the ecosystem and not spread and cause problems. Who has neighbors here that have invasive plants? Yeah. This is a really tough one because just because you care a lot about native plants doesn't mean everyone does. And just because that plant is invasive and we should really get rid of it doesn't mean your next door neighbor does. It also might be that your next door neighbor's dad or grandfather planted that burning bush and they're emotionally attached to it and don't want to get rid of it. And what I've tended to do, because I show up on a lot of properties where I look around and I'm like, oh no, this whole thing is just filled with invasive plants. I just educate and I don't push. Because if you push people, if you come in with like a real big, you got to get rid of that, they're going to say no. They're just going to say no right up off the bat. So describing invasive plants kind of like pollution, where it's something that they grow in disturbed areas, we're effectively just kind of putting these plants in that are polluting the landscape. So that's one way to talk about it and educate. Another way is just to say, I actually used to have one of those because a lot of us, didn't know, put them in years ago, and then we're like, oh, this is kind of bad. And making it, more of a team effort rather than an attack. And say, I used to have one, I actually took it out, and I see so many more birds in my yard now that I put in a Prunus maritima, which is a beach plum that does really well in this area. Things like that are really nice ways to kind of bring someone into the fold rather than kind of going on the offensive. Does anyone have any stories from talking to neighbors about invasive plants? Or have you just tried not to touch the subject? That's another thing that I see a lot is, your neighbor has a privet hedge and you're like, well, I don't like it, but I'd like to keep the peace, so I'm never gonna say anything about it. And, I get it, but you could also, say, to this person, I love this hedge. It's great privacy, but did you know that that's actually one of the plants that I was pulling this weekend out of the J.C. Phillips, and I've seen it spread. Do you think that at some point we could collaborate on replacing it? Something like that. And, you know, they might say, no, but they might also go do their own research and then come back to you like a couple months later and be like, you know, it's pretty bad, huh? Which I've had clients do with me where they've said, I'm never getting rid of these barberries. And then, you know, a year, two into us working together and me educating them as we go, they suddenly are like, you got to get rid of those, replace them with anything native. And it's great. And, you know, sometimes it just takes some time. So the full invasive plant list is here. I'm going to make this entire presentation available to everyone. We'll either be emailing it out or putting it up on the library Facebook or something like that. So you'll be able to click on this. This list is not exhaustive. They do not have a lot of funding. It's run by like one guy and a couple people that walk around and say, hey guy, we found some invasive plants in this area. We should probably record that and put it on the list. But then it also has to go through a whole review process before it even gets on the list. So when I hear the argument, you know, oh, well, this isn't on the official list. How can you call it invasive? I'm like, because the official list is not complete. And it's hard to get it complete. It still checks all the boxes of being invasive, but just because the state doesn't say it is doesn't mean it's not. So this is everyone's favorite, Japanese knotweed. That's where this honey is from, and I'm actually going to give this back to you before we forget. Thank you, I appreciate it. So Japanese knotweed. Who has Japanese knotweed on their property here? Oi, that's too many people. So Japanese knotweed was actually planted as erosion control by the state on riverbanks. Crimes. We didn't know. Again, it's just one of those we didn't know, we thought it would help. The research wasn't there, didn't know how bad it was going to be, and then by the time we realized how bad it was going to be, here we are, it's everywhere. So Japanese knotweed is a really funny one because if you just chop it, it's just going to come back worse. It's either going to spread its rhizomes out and come up other places, or spread downward and get even deeper, and then just come back bigger and better in like 30 days. It doesn't even take a year. It just comes right back up. So there's been a ton of research on how to control this particular plant. So there's the window method. This is the one that is recommended by conservationists all over the place. This does have you cutting the plants, but you don't necessarily have to if that's something that is not feasible for you. You missed that window of cutting. Cutting can be skipped. But if you are going to cut it, make sure that you are going to treat it. Because if you cut it without treating it, again, it will just spread more. The cutting is mostly because it gets so tall that it can be really hard to treat. So if you cut it in June, it's kind of like a Chelsea chop, if anybody knows what a Chelsea chop is. It's a term for when you cut perennials down in June so that they're a little tighter and a little smaller and a little cuter when they bloom. So this is one of those times where using something like glyphosate is actually one of the only things you can do. Now, I anecdotally have also used Burnout by Bonide, which is a citric acid and clove oil mixture. It smells good, will still burn if you get it on your skin, so still wear PPE. It's still, pretty nasty stuff, but it's not, it doesn't have as many lawsuits about it. The glyphosate is the same glyphosate that it has the lawsuits against it. So please, if you're going to do this, if you're like, I'm going to try it this year, wear PPE. Don't do it on a windy day. Don't do it on a rainy day. Yes. Oh, sorry. In a post-COVID world, I think I expected most people would know. It's just personal protection equipment. So wear a mask, wear rubber gloves. Some people go so far as put on a Tyvek suit if they're worried about getting it anywhere on them because, it has been shown to cause cancer. So do not get it on yourself. So this is, these are all my disclaimers. This is why I work with a guy named Brian Colleran, who does come out here sometimes, and he is really good at judiciously using herbicide because he runs a company called Ecological Landscape Management. So he's about the ecology of things rather than being like an herbicide guy, if you know what I mean. So this is the window. Penn State Extension has one of the best descriptions of this process that I've seen. So this link, when you download this or take it off Google Drive, it has this sort of, blocked off times for once the growth starts, pre-herbicide cutting, that like chopping in June that we talked about. And then it also has when you're going to put the herbicide, and then if you're going to do it again, or if you didn't cut the plants, when you can start treating with herbicide. The description is really detailed. So I would read it a couple times if you're going to try this method. Also, if you don't have a lot of it, it's just like a teeny bit, you can usually dig it out and just keep an eye on the spot and then dig it out again. This whole scary process is for when you have something that is either, coming through rocks, coming through cement, is too large an area for you to be digging out, or you'd have to like hire a guy with a backhoe to dig it out or something like that. I again am not advocating for like an extreme use of herbicide. This is like the one time that I'm like, this is really one of the only options. It's not great. It's not my favorite thing to teach about, to be honest. Is there any other questions about? Yes. The bottom one says biannual foliar herbicide or uncut plants. So that is that like area, the July through September, is if you didn't have a chance to cut the plant, or if you treated it the first year and then a little bit of it came back, you just treat it again the next year. Because it's even with that crazy herbicide, it still sometimes comes back.
Yes, I have heard, and we've tried it, but not too successfully. When you you can cut the knotweed down to about 6 inches, and then take a skewer that you would use in your barbecue.
Yeah.
And go down into the center of the stem, and then pour the commercial vinegar, the really strong
Oh, yeah.
down the hole, and
Has that worked?
kind of.
Well, and that's the thing. It will work kind of thing. If you're like, I just really don't want to use glyphosate, which I totally understand. I hate it. You can try things like the commercial vinegar, which you can get, at the hardware store. A lot of times it's in the cleaning section. So you can try vinegar. You can try the bonide burnout, and do a similar thing where you like pour an undiluted amount directly into the stem. Those are definitely options. They take a little bit more effort. You have to do them more frequently. You have to do them probably for a couple years. But eventually they usually do work. So I think the point of me putting this out there is that this is the one that's like confirmed to function the way that it says it will. But as you said, there's a lot of other like things that people anecdotally have been like, oh, it worked for me, but it just hasn't been, there's not like a study on it yet. Hopefully they do more and actually, confirm that there's other stuff that we can use that's not glyphosate. Any other Japanese knotweed questions?
How do you get the town to attack those patches that grow by the side of the road that aren't anybody's actual responsibility?
If I had the time, I would be trying to put through some kind of ordinance about it. I would probably... So what we did to start tackling the forest invasives is we went to the conservation committee and we were like, what do we need to do to get this to happen? So what I would do if I were you is maybe email or call the head of the conservation committee and say, hey, This is a major problem in our city. It's going to lower property values. Like, I don't know if you guys know, in the UK, you cannot get a mortgage if the property has Japanese knotweed on it. So, I mean, because it'll break foundations. It'll cause huge issues, and they're an island. So it's one of those where, like, if they let that go rampant, that could, take over the whole country if we, just, like, let it. But so, I mean, I would present them maybe with something referencing how it will bring down property values. You start bringing it down to money, and that's usually where people will start paying attention. But yeah, I mean, you could do an email campaign. I would share that. If you were like, I want to start bothering, the city about this, I would totally promote that. I just haven't had the time. So yeah, I would make us think about it. And eventually you get to the right person, or you annoy people just enough that they're like, maybe we should do something about this. They work for us after all, right? Yes?
Yeah, but I've seen them, they have a machine that cuts it,
Yep.
and then it dries off somewhere else, and it probably cuts a different plant and spreads the knotweed around the town.
Yes. So I've actually talked to a decent amount of the landscaper folks who, manage some of the town stuff. Part of the problem is they don't have a lot of budget. They don't have a lot of people too. So they just do what they do everywhere, which is they take their brush cutter and they just cut things away from the street. And I don't necessarily blame them, because like they don't really have other options right now, because there isn't budget or an ordinance or anything for treating those particular plants differently from any other brush that's encroaching on the road. So I'm not saying that it's okay. I agree with you. They should not be doing that. That's not how we should be treating Japanese knotweed. But until we do have something in place, it's going to be really tough to change that. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Yeah, I hate it too. But yeah, until there's like a citywide or a statewide effort to battle Japanese knotweed, the people on the boots on the ground don't really have a lot of options. And a lot of times they aren't educated in what Japanese knotweed is versus other plants. So they're like, I'm just chopping a plant.
Back to your thing about the properties,
Yeah.
like in the UK and Ireland, if there's knotweed on the property, the engineer that's inspecting for the buyer would say, do not buy this property.
Yeah. That's crazy.
The attorney will say, do not buy this property. You won't be able to sell a property with knotweed, even if they have cash.
Wow. All right. Well, that's something for me to add to this. Thank you. Oh, he said that if you have an engineer go and evaluate a property for you to buy, and just like take a look at everything, when you just have like an inspector come through and look, if it has knotweed on the property, they'll say, don't buy that. Go somewhere else. In the UK and Ireland. So that's how bad it is. They understand like exactly how bad this plant can be. And not to say it's bad everywhere. In its native environment where it has predators and things that eat it, it's perfectly fine. In Japan, it's a fine plant. But it's just not here where it doesn't necessarily have those kind of predators. Any other thoughts, questions on knotweed? I feel like we need to form a Japanese knotweed support group. So this is one that is newer in terms of the grand scheme of invasive plants. We see this everywhere. It binds around the chain link fences around town. And this is, to me, up there with Japanese knotweed. Does anyone know why? I've talked about it a couple of talks. So black swallowwort is loosely related to milkweed. So monarch butterflies will actually lay their eggs on this because they're like, is this milkweed? Maybe. But then the caterpillars hatch and they don't have anything to eat because this is actually not close enough related to actually work as food for the monarch butterfly caterpillars. So it's one that drives me nuts. It's a major issue. And it's one that is also, it's really resilient when it comes to herbicides. So it really does generally have to be dug out. Digging out the roots is one of the main things that I recommend. If you are a person who's like, I just don't have the energy, the ability, even just ripping off the top so that there aren't leaves for the monarchs to lay eggs on, is better than nothing. Yes. Yeah.
And the roots are in rocks or in paper or something like that. What do you do with that?
So I've heard that boiling water can work really well on them if they're young enough, if they're really well established. I've been looking for studies on what herbicide would work the best, and I'm a little bit waiting for like scientists to totally figure out which one works the best before I just start like dumping herbicide on things. But you can try the horticultural vinegar, especially if it's in a crack in the sidewalk or something where you're not really expecting to grow anything, and it's okay if you kill the soil. You know, dump a bunch of undiluted horticultural vinegar in there, see if that kills the roots, and get back to me. Tell me. Tell me if it works. Because a lot of times we're working in gardens, so we can just dig everything out. And I've actually like disassembled rock walls to just get the roots because it was easier than the other thing.
Because like you said, you do see them in fences and often they're along the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And that's where the roots are.
Yeah, I would try the horticultural vinegar. It's really strong, but I'm.
Is that the same as the 5%?
So I just get this. It's a cleaning vinegar from like from hardware stores. It works pretty well on weeds, so potentially I don't really have a good answer for you. Sorry. Garlic mustard. Weirdly, this one is actually on the bottom of the list for a lot of conservationists, because what they've actually witnessed in forests is that it will pop up and there'll be a ton of it, and then it'll kind of like die down and like move on to another section somehow. So over time, it's not as damaging as maybe some other invasive plants, but if you've got like a small patch of it or something, I would recommend digging it out. So when I say pull, I don't mean pull the tops off. I mean like take a gardening knife and like pop the roots up and pull the whole plant out. This one is hard to, weed out when the plants are really little. Like the, I think I've got, yeah. So this is when it's like the first year, it's really tiny. It's hard to pull. So what I generally tell people is you can wait until it's a little bigger. So the first year plants are tough, but if you only have so much time, pulling out this stuff where it actually has the flowers, that is the stuff that's gonna make seeds, and it makes thousands and thousands of seeds. So you really wanna get it before it goes to seed. Also, if you do manage to catch it when it is young, it makes a really good pesto. So that's something to keep in mind. Yeah, so this is just being consistent, and solarize it in a trash bag before you compost it, which just means put it in a trash bag and put it in the sun. That's all solarized means, just fancy.
How long does it need to be in the trash bag in the sun?
I would just open it up and look at it and see if it's dead. Just because it really depends on the weather and how hot it is and how sunny it's been. So if you were to just throw the garlic mustard in compost, it will just reroot. So if you just take like a handful of garlic mustard that you've pulled and you just throw it on top of your compost pile, those roots will just go back. I've seen it happen. They just, yeah. So unless those roots are dead, don't put it in your compost because you'll just end up with bigger problems. So this one is a big one. This is one that we're doing a lot with at JC Phillips. And it is a monster. So the thing that I've always seen is that people love these berries for fall containers and for reeds, and people don't know that they're actually just spreading invasive plants. It can get really, really big. So this is a little one. So this one is only little. This one is about 35 years old that we found at JC Phillips. It was probably the first vine that formed in the little area that we're currently working on the weekends. And it's a real beast. But the good thing about it is that doing the death by 1,000 cuts method for bittersweet actually works. So, if you chop a woody plant in the winter, it discourages growth. If you chop a woody plant in the spring or summer, it's going to explode more because it has more growth hormone in the plant. So ideally what you want to be doing is right now going around in your, neighborhood or in your backyard and chopping stuff. And what I recommend is chopping about hip height so that when you have to go back and do another chop, you've got room. And also, if you have a big area of a bunch of invasive plants, you can kind of look across and see, okay, we've done up to there, because that's where the chops stop. It also gives you a handhold for in the spring when you go to dig the root ball out, you actually have something to wiggle back and forth. If you just chop all the way down to the ground, it's all going to come back. You're not going to have a handhold. You're not going to be able to figure out where it was. It's kind of a nightmare. So when you're chopping, just kind of keep it to a certain level.
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
If you're cutting it a few feet from the ground, it's already woven all through the tree. Is it necessary to get all that down?
No, I actually recommend not doing that because what it does is it twines so tightly that it will actually kill parts of a tree. And if you pull, you might pull a branch down and it'll conk you on the head. So for safety, please do not pull the vines. No. Once you take away its source of food and water, which are its root system, it will die. So it'll just die up there, rot, fall down eventually. That's what we want. I tell people all the time at our invasive pulls on the weekends, do not pull the vines. Because I've just watched people kind of automatically be like, yoink, and just watched a widowmaker just fall. And I'm like, thank God that was 2 feet away from you. It's a little dangerous to be pulling on any vines in the woods because you just don't know what's above you. What I will say is there are some vines that look a little similar to bittersweet that you don't want to cut. One of them is Virginia creeper, and the way that I tell people to differentiate between bittersweet and Virginia creeper is to look at how tightly the vine is twining. If it's real tight, like this one over here, it's probably bittersweet. If it's kind of like loosely gathered around the plant, it's probably Virginia creeper, and that's fine to leave. It's actually a host plant for a butterfly, so we like to leave those. And then the other one that tends to grow with bittersweet is grapevine, which I'm actually going to pass around because it's kind of fun and twirly. And some thorns, so I can pass it around. So that's actually a native. That's actually a native grapevine, and that's the one that has the little twirly parts of the vine that grab onto things. So when you see any of those twirlies, you leave that. That stays. And there's a whole branch of bittersweet in the back, and I'm also going to pass around just a little twig so you can see what it looks like. So this is the bittersweet with the berries. So there is actually a native bittersweet. I have yet to see it anywhere. I think it may have been fully pushed out in a lot of the areas that we look at. If you see a bittersweet that looks kind of funny, if all the berries are growing just at the tip of the branch, send me a picture. Don't cut it and send me a picture. I would love to ID it for you and figure out if it is the native version, or tell you, no, that's still the invasive one, please chop that. Oh yeah.
Is there any kind of chemical or substance that you can use to poison or give it a hard time?
Yes. So one of the methods of control for woody invasive plants is called the cut and paint method, which I think I have a slide further on about. We can talk about it now. So the cut and paint method is when you cut something like this. So you have a fresh cut. And then you take a herbicide like glyphosate, like triclopyr, and you just paint the concentrated version of it directly on the cut that you have made. What this does is it causes the plant to bring that chemical directly down into the roots and harm or kill it. I generally don't, I generally don't do this because we work a lot on conservation lands. We are working in places where, you know, we would have to have an herbicide applicator to do that. But as a homeowner, you can easily do that. You can go, tricloper is just ever so slightly less bad than glyphosate, so that's the one that I usually recommend, and you can get that at like Lowe's or Home Depot or a hardware store. Usually it's called brush killer, but you'll see the active ingredient on the brush killer and it'll say tricloper. The one that I have recommended to clients is by BioAdvanced, and it's called BioAdvanced Brush Killer, and that's concentrated tricloper. And what the safest way to do it is to get like a bingo dauber from like Michael's or AC Moore, just one of those bottles with a little spongy on top. And you put the chemical in there with a little bit of food dye. Usually people use blue because there's not much in nature that's blue. And then you know the ones that you've treated and the ones that you haven't. And if you get a little bit on you, you're like, blue, I better wash. So, you know, just for safety, doing that. And always, as always, wear gloves.
So we have some property that has a well, so we're not really excited about poisoning bittersweet.
Yes.
That'll go into the soil.
Yeah.
What
So.
do you use instead of actual poison?
So the little bit of tricloper that you're using on the bittersweet should stay within the roots of the plant. However, those will break down. The half-life of tricloper is supposedly only about like 30 days. Again, I am not someone who has an herbicide applicator's license, so do not quote me on that. But so like I would do my research on that and just see how bad that would be, or talk to someone who has a little bit more herbicide knowledge. You can try doing things like using horticultural vinegar on it, but honestly, if it were my property, I would probably just do the death by 1,000 cuts method and just not add anything nasty to my soil. If I have a well that, you know, is soaking up stuff, I would just chop every winter, and eventually you tire the roots out and they die. All right, so burning bush. This is my favorite one to tell clients they have to get rid of. People love burning bush. It looks really pretty in the fall, but so do many, many, many other plants. This is not the only option for a red plant in the fall. Burning bush is really easily identified by its little wings. It's also called winged euonymus. It has these little wings on the branches that you can see right up here. So burning bush is spread a lot of times by birds, to which people say, well, if the birds are eating it, why is it bad? Number one, it pushes out native plants. If you walk into J.C. Phillips from the old entrance, the one that's on the road, and you walk about 200 yards in, so you go past the bend and you start walking into like the real woodsy part, if you look to the left, there's like at least an acre of burning bush there. That's not supposed to be there. That's not how our forests are supposed to look. That's one of the areas we're going to be tackling with the invasive task force that Green Beverly has so generously helped me organize. So number one, that's why. The other thing is that the nutrient content of the berries of this plant are not high enough for birds to actually utilize this plant for the winter. Like, yes, they'll eat it, but it's like having, you know, like a bag of chips when what you really need is like a roast dinner. So it's just, it doesn't function well in our ecosystem. Another one, so I should say the cut and paint method is going to be talked about at the end of these slides. These are all woody plants that method or the death by 1,000 cuts works for. So barberry is another one where, you know, in its native habitat, the berries are eaten by a bunch of creatures that have evolved with it. I've actually had people on the internet tell me that live in Japan that are like, we actually love eating barberry. And I'm like, great, we can't have it here. So in New England, it is incredibly invasive, and also it really sucks to find in the woods because you'll be like pulling stuff, you'll be cutting, and it's got these thorns that are just insane. In the 50s and 60s, it was planted under windows as like protection shrubs, which they function great like that. But let's put a rose bush or something that's not going to be as invasive. The other thing is there's been one study that has shown that this can be a nice habitat for ticks, which it's just one study, but even the suggestion of it makes me feel like I don't want it anywhere on my property. Multiflora rose is another thorny one. This is one that we are tackling in J.C. Phillips. You'll see these, they have really pretty little white flowers. They bloom once in the season. They smell amazing. They're terrible. They have really tiny rose hips that are not really that valuable ecologically. They tend to take over and form like groves of multiflora rose where it's hard for anything else to grow because it kind of shades everything out. If you have a rose bush on your property that you did not plant that has a really simple white flower, it's probably multiflora rose, and I recommend getting rid of it. The thorny branch back there is what it looks like. It has 2 little thorns that come out of a really evenly spaced area. And the thing is, we do have native roses. So if you do have multiflora rose on your property, or you suspect you have multiflora rose on your property, feel free to email me a picture and be like, hey, is this what this is? I don't mind. I would rather you guys do that than accidentally chop down like a nice swamp rose or something that's supposed to be there. So there's the hand pulling, the digging, and the herbicide. This is an example of someone using blue dye and a little sprayer to spray the edges of the stump. Now, you'll see they're just going along the edge. The live part of the woody plant is the cambium, which is just the edge of the, there's the bark and then there's the cambium. So you really only have to go around the edge. I mean, if it's a small little thing, you can just kind of go around the whole entire stump. I really love the death by 1,000 cuts method. It's really satisfying. This is a picture from last year of a big bittersweet that I chopped. It is something that you do need to do every year. Like if you do it one year and then you skip a year and you still do it the next year, fine. But if you're like in an area, like you're at your cousin's up in New Hampshire and you're like, oh, we'll do this. And then you're not gonna come back ever again and do it. And you know he's not gonna do it. Doing it at least once is good. It's better if you can like continuously do it, because otherwise things are just gonna come back if they aren't chemically treated. If you're like, wow, I'm sorry, did you say dig out these stumps? There's a couple tools that can be really helpful for that. A weed wrench takes a lot of effort out of the process, which is the thing on the left.
They're awesome.
They're great. They're wonderful. And then I personally really like this shovel. It's called a root slayer. I find it easier to carry around with me in the woods. The weed wrench can be a little unwieldy, but the edges are really, really sharp, and it just kind of slices through everything, and I just kind of go around the whole root ball and then use a long-handled shovel for like the torque and pop it up. So once you take out all these invasive plants, what are you going to do? You're going to plant aggressive native plants. This is where things that grow really quickly, like 9-barks grow really quickly. If you want in a kind of aggressive perennial, you want to be planting things like Canadian anemone or Pacra aurea. You want to fill in that space as much as you can once you take out invasive plants, because there's usually seeds in the seed bank of those invasives that are going to try and come up. So you want to shade those out. Some of the really good replacements are things like red chokeberry, buttonbush, green and gold, which is this really pretty little yellow flower. Mullygrass instead of some of the invasive grasses. And some of these invasive plants we didn't talk about because they maybe either aren't as prevalent in this area, or I just wanted to make sure we had time for the really, really bad ones. But yeah, so these are just some good replacements. And some of the invasive plants that people don't want to hear about being invasive are things like English ivy or periwinkle. Invasive ground covers are really, really tough to get rid of, mostly because people are like, well, they're already established. they look so pretty. And I get it. But even just doing like little chunks every year of an established ground cover and replacing it with something native is valuable work. Like you don't have to do it all at once in order for it to be valuable. The UMass Extension program has a really, really good list of replacements, especially for people who are like, but my burning bush, it's so red. They have a bunch of red foliar options in the fall. So these are some pictures of the aggressive native plants. I know we're creeping up on the end, so I might go a little quick. Pacra aurea, which is just has this gorgeous golden flower in the spring. This is a blue mist flower that's a perennial actually, and it reseeds readily. So if you have a sunny area that you're like, I just need something to take this over, this can work in sunny and part sun. Solidago rugosa is aggressive, and you can split it and move it and put it in a bunch of places, and it'll be super helpful. It is goldenrod. Solidagos are goldenrods. And if you're like, I'm allergic to goldenrod, the likelihood of you being allergic to goldenrod is pretty low because the pollen is actually too heavy for it to be wind pollinated. It has to be insect pollinated. So if your kid brings in a bouquet of goldenrod and shakes it around and you're like sniffling, it's probably because there's a bunch of ragweed pollen on it. So try rinsing it before you put it in the vase. Fragaria virginiana, again, another one that's really good for hot sun. This one is one that I'm trying to convince everyone to switch their lawns to, because in the middle of our droughts, these still look really good. Bidens frondosa, this one, it will take over. Like 100% will take over a shady area. This is the anemone canadensis. This one is good if you've got this and the Pacra aurea in a shady spot. Whichever one does better will kind of take over, but you kind of have two factions fighting like garlic mustard or any other sort of shady, weedy, invasive plant. Now, where do you buy these? My favorite place is the Monarch Gardener. She, I think, has permanently moved to a spot. I think it's on the Ipswich-Topsfield line. And Oak Haven Sanctuary in North Reading. Garden in the Woods in Framingham is a hike, but it's also a beautiful hike. If you're willing to go down there and kind of wander around, you can get a lot of really good ideas for native plant gardens. And if you want to go online, Prairie Moon is really good. The other one that's not on here that's online is Izel Plants, which if you want to check that out, that's good too. IZEL. Yeah, of course. And then some of our local favorites, Corliss, Wolf Hill, and the Marblehead Garden Center have all decided to start stocking native plants and have slowly been growing their native plant sections over time. So those are really, really fun ones to go to as well. You're gonna have this link, which is a community-made map from a Facebook group. So this, if you click on that up there, it'll bring you to the live version of this map. And it'll, show you all kinds of spots that have native plants that may not have been on my list. So if you're like, okay, I now know a little bit more about this, I want to start keeping an eye on my neighborhood, areas near streams and waterways are specifically at risk. If you would like to do work in a spot like that, you have to get a permit from CONCOM, from the Conservation Commission. You can't just start working anywhere within 200 feet of a waterway. But they're the ones that are most at risk. So if you're someone who has some time and is willing to kind of put in the work to talk to CONCOM and get that going, please do. Areas that have erosion, conservation land, or if you see a spot that's just open earth, like if it's a spot that's just sitting there, dirt, throw some native seeds on it. I didn't tell you that. So there are several local invasive plant task forces that have started up. I put Mary Ellen Dixon first because she's actually the one who introduced me to this kind of work. She's doing multiple days a week, I think, at this point in the winter at Willowdale and Ipswich. So she actually just put in, I'm going to update this because I think this is the old link. She started an invasive plant task force Facebook page. The Ipswich Watershed Association also tends to have meetup days at their location in Ipswich. And we have times on Sundays, and we actually have new times on Saturdays. So Sundays 11 to 12:30. We are at J.C. Phillips at the parking lot that's right next to the new community garden. If you would like to be added to that list and get information and join us, I think Shelly has a little email list back there, so make sure you get your name on that list. And then we also have a meetup on Saturdays now, 10 to 11:30. And so those are really good for learning. Like, you don't have to know everything. Even if you have, that's what I get for talking with my hands. Even if you have friends who've never come to anything like this or just curious about it and want to learn, you can bring them with you. The team leads on Saturday will teach them what they need to know about the specific plants that we're tackling in J.C. Phillips. I am usually there on Sundays with Joy Campbell, who also used to run a gardening company. And we will teach you what you need to know. We'll provide the tools. It's really fun, actually. I call it Nature's Rage Room. So the other ones are the Bittersweet Brigade in Salem, Chris Burke, who I think they usually do like kind of a big, huge once a year meetup on Super Bowl Sunday. So that's coming up. So take a look at Facebook for that. And as we have more leaders kind of show up and want to do that kind of work, we will be adding more time slots for J.C. Phillips and other areas around Beverly.
Are the Beverly Saturdays and Sundays appropriate for children, like 11 years old?
So you can bring a child, but they have to be accompanied by an adult. Everyone who comes has to sign a waiver, just because, we're giving you a bunch of tools, and Plant Magic and Green Beverly are trying to be careful. Oh yeah, no, we teach people. We have a mother-daughter duo that comes every Sunday, and we try really hard to educate people. The point is to be educating as we work. It's one of the best ways to learn about this kind of stuff, because I can show you pictures all day long. It's a lot harder to do it this way. It's a lot easier when I can just say, oh hey, look at this branch, and like show how things are changing. So if you would like, we have homework. Eating the Landscape by the Black Forager. She has a bunch of stuff if you're, slowly taking things out, but you'd like to make them useful when you pull them. She's got some good stuff on that. And there's an expansion on invasive plant ID. There's a slide deck that I found that just has more ID stuff. And then this is my info. And then I'm just going to show you a couple tools if you're like all jazzed up and you're like, cool, what do I use for this? So besides the root slayer and the weed wrench, getting a really big pair of loppers is really good. I know people want to go for like the Fiskars cheapies, but you're going to beat them up. You're going to really, really beat them up. So what I would recommend is getting something that is going to be able to open up really, really wide so you can chop really big vines and stuff like that. The one back there is the same as this one for the raffle. So if you haven't signed up for the raffle, you should do that. And then we have the little baby version of the bypass pruners, which are really good for if you're just kind of trying to get into like an invasive honeysuckle shrub or something like that. Just a, regular old pair of bypass pruners. And then having a saw is very handy. The loppers can't do everything. So this is going to be really, really helpful. And I recommend getting one that does close like this because you're in the woods. So if you have, if you already have a saw, but it's one that has a sheath, you're going to lose the sheath. So get one that just folds just like that so that you don't have to worry about that part. And then wearing pants with a lot of pockets helps too. And I think that's really it. Any other questions? Yes.
So can you put the information about the tools in the email that you sent, or is it in here?
I will make sure that it ends up in this document. I'll just edit it real quick.
That would be lovely. The other question I have is I often walk and I'm in the woods for like half an hour and I'll see something. Is there anything I can do right then and there? Like, I see garlic mustard all the time.
So the rule of thumb is really to, like if you want to start doing invasive plant task force stuff, what the rule of thumb is to find out who owns the property and get permission. However, if you happen to hike with a pair of pruners, wouldn't that be interesting?
But if there's garlic mustard on the side of the road and I'm walking down the side of the road, if I pull it and just leave it there, is that?
So it will reroute if you can't, like if there's a log to put it on or something. Yeah, if it can dry out, I think that that's better than nothing.
So pruners in a small plastic.
Yes, perhaps. In the back.
I go to the Beverly dump to get
Yes.
soil, composted soil.
Mhm.
You recommend that I don't do that?
So the thing about getting city compost is that they are not tracking how hot that compost gets. So if you get compost from, say, Brick Ends or Coast of Maine, they are heating that compost up to at least 165 degrees to kill any seeds and roots that are in it. What I have noticed is that city composts do not track that. They do not make sure that it is heated up enough so that it kills those kind of things. So if you are going to get city compost, you have to keep an eye on that spot for invasive plants. It is nice, it is easy, it is free for Beverly residents. I'm not gonna tell you not to do it, like especially if that's the thing you can afford, but just keep an eye on it. Or, you know, if you are really worried about it and you're only using a little, you could put the compost in a trash bag and heat it up yourself. But it's definitely not gonna be as clean, if you will. So I'm not gonna tell you not to do it, but be aware that there could be invasive stuff in it.
And also, do you know of an app you can take a picture of a plant and get the names of?
So I really like Picture This. What I will say is that if you are a fresh new plant person, you're not going to know whether it's wrong or not a lot of times. So ideally, you're going to want to double check it. So if you take a picture of a plant and it says it's Japanese knotweed, go then to Google and type in Japanese knotweed and really compare pictures and be like, is this actually the thing it's saying? What I've tended to tell like my team is feel free to use the apps, but send me a picture so I can confirm. But for folks who don't have that luxury, having a book is actually really, really good because they'll have, you know, the ID characteristics, like the Peterson's guides are really nice for that, for having all the characteristics listed of a plant. And if it doesn't have every single one of those characteristics, it's not that plant.
And the garlic stuff, you break it apart and
You can smell the garlic mustard, yes. The garlic mustard is, honestly, it's like pretty tasty. One of my team members actually, every single time we do a garlic mustard pulse, she makes pesto and it's really good. So yeah, I would definitely recommend doing, you know, the sniff test for garlic mustard if you're not sure. Some people don't have as much of an eye for the leaf shape, so that's a really good way to do it. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions, Shelley, and then I think we're wrapping up. All right, cool. I didn't know if we were, Graham, are we getting kicked out at all? All right, cool. So 2 more questions and then we'll try to wrap up.
So on Cross Street, there's a woman who grows native plants by seed. Do you know about that? I don't know who she is really, but it's like at the garden school.
Oh yeah, I've heard of her. Yeah.
She has tables out.
Yes. That should be on my list. Honestly, I think I don't know her name, so. But yeah, so she is selling native plants. So that is a nice local spot to get native plants as well. It's right on Stanley Street, right near the compost facility, actually. Right at the garden school. It's at. Yep. So it's just in that same parking lot. And I think there was one more. Yes.
Are there any plants where your village cutting is actually backfiring? I have a lot of English ivy and I have tried putting it back.
So the English ivy really does better if you can actually dig it out. Yeah, that's one that if you cut it, it's just gonna come back unless you treat it with herbicide. Yeah, I would dig out English ivy. I debated having that one on here. It's not technically on the invasive species list. You can still buy it at garden centers, but it's a nightmare. And it also, when it climbs up trees, the way that the roots function, it actually gets under the bark and into the cambium and will kill that tree eventually. So if you have people will say, oh, I have this beautiful tree, it has this ivy on it, it's so gorgeous. And I'm like, that's really bad, actually. I know it looks pretty, but if you like that tree, chop the ivy. And what I recommend is chopping just like 2 feet out of the bottom of the ivy and not pulling it off the bark, because you can pull the bark off. But if you take it off of like a 2-foot section at the bottom, you can see if it starts to climb up again, if you haven't been able to actually get it out of the roots. Because sometimes the ivy is like in the roots of the tree and impossible to like really dig out. So you just kind of have to keep chopping it back. But yeah. Thank you so much, guys. This has been really, really great.
So we talked about the raffle. So here's this gigantic lopper. I really like him, actually. It's a he. So I have selected Caroline Curley. Now, if you don't actually think you're going to use this, maybe we'll go to number 2. But who's Caroline Curley? You're the winner of the lottery. Thank you so much for coming. If you've registered, we're going to send you the Green Beverly newsletter. Now, the other thing is, though, that I think what we'll do, and Cheryl was referencing it, is that BevCam, thank you, BevCam.
Thanks,
for
BevCam.
being